This is a CTV News special presentation.
For Canadians, Canada Day is special. A day of celebration of the birth of a nation. But for one province, the explosive sounds are somber echoes of a tragic past. July 1st, 1916, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians fought and sacrificed their lives in a World War I battle called Beaumont-Hamel, when the Newfoundland Regiment was nearly wiped out. For Newfoundlanders, July 1st is as much a day to mourn as it is to celebrate. On a sunny Saturday in late May in northern France, an honor party gathers at Beaumont-Hamel to remember the sacrifices made by Newfoundland and Labrador soldiers in World War I. This year, July 1st will be special. One soldier, an unknown Newfoundland soldier who has been lifted from his deathly slumber in French soil, will journey home more than a century after he died on the battlefield. David Emberley is an RCMP officer who lost a great-great-uncle in the Great War. But being a native Newfoundlander makes this all the more significant. What does Beaumont-Hamel mean to Newfoundlanders?
July 1st, 1916 was the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, when all these Newfoundlanders were killed. Back then, we weren't part of Canada. We didn't join Canada until 1949. So usually in Newfoundland, you have remembrance until lunchtime. You remember Beaumont-Hamel and the fallen, and then 12 o'clock, you celebrate being part of Canada.
Is it tough to hold both of those identities together?
I'm very proud to be an RCMP officer. I'm proud to be a Canadian, but I'm also proud to be a Newfoundlander.
Once farm fields, Beaumont-Hamel is a national monument, a memorial first kept by the Dominion of Newfoundland when it was a country of its own. Peaceful today, the scars of a bloody confrontation are plain to see. This support trench, nicknamed St. John's Road, is where the Newfoundland Regiment was positioned, waiting to be called to the front line to take the battle to the Germans. This trench marked the front line, but just getting here that day was a gruesome slog through dead and wounded. Once here, Newfoundlanders were exposed to machine gun fire from down below. They were walking to their deaths. For the Germans dug in at the bottom of this hill, the fate of the advancing Newfoundlanders and the entire Battle of Beaumont-Hamel was sealed. From this perspective, you can get a sense of just how clear a line of sight the Germans had. It was over in half an hour. Of 800 over the top, 324 died. 386 were wounded. The next day, only 68 answered the roll call.
And if you look at the tree line up here, you can see that's approximately where the front line was on July 1.
Frank Gogos is a historian who has studied and written about the Newfoundland Regiment.
So there was quite a few Newfoundlanders who were advancing in this sector that were taken out before they even reached their own front line because the commanding officer thought it was a good idea to advance them over the top instead of trying to get them to the front line because the previous attacks had failed and it was chock full of wounded soldiers.
So the Germans were here, Newfoundlanders were there,
Yep.
and the Germans had a direct line of sight. So really,
Pretty well, yeah.
you really get the sense that they had no chance.
And they designed this sector to funnel them down towards their machine guns.
And what are all these holes that we're seeing?
Well, these are shell holes. Some of these would have been British After the attack happened, the Germans began shelling this area heavily, trying to keep more attacks from coming.
The battle was so violent that for many of the fallen, they remain only known unto God. Not just here at Beaumont-Hamel, but at other battlefields where the Newfoundlanders fought and died. Sarah Lockyer is a forensic anthropologist working for the Canadian Forces, trying to identify remains that are found even today all across northern France.
The Great War happened more than 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it still matter today?
There are so many that are still missing. We don't know where they are. And I think it's the least we can do to try everything we can, everything in our power to try to return their identity to them if we are able to find their remains.
Is there a proactive search for remains, or does a farmer find remains and then call somebody up? How does it work?
For us in Canada, we do not actively search and recover human remains. We respond when a set of human remains thought to be Canadian are discovered.
And so if a farmer were to find something, he or she would call the...
Ideally, yes, the recovery unit or the police.
Okay.
And then also the police know to contact Commonwealth Workers Commission and the recovery unit team.
And they have to respond within
a 2-hour time frame of any notification of a discovery to ensure that they can get there as quickly as possible, recover all the human remains, and then also to prevent looters from accessing the site.
People actually loot remains.
People actually do loot remains, yes. They will take the metal artifacts, cap badges, identification discs, any other type of military equipment. But then it essentially ensures that we will never be able to identify that person.
When these kind of artifacts or remains are removed or looted, what do you think about that?
It makes me very angry that the person who is removing all the artifacts from the remains is effectively killing that soldier all over again. Because like I said, it removes any chance of being able to identify that person. This is a human being. Why are you doing this to a human being when we have a chance to identify him?
August 1914. The Dominion of Newfoundland was a proud nation in its own right. There was money in fish exports and lumber, and the shops along Water Street in St. John's bustled with customers. But in Europe, the assassination of Austria's Archduke Ferdinand and his wife sparked war. Within a month, Austria, Germany, Turkey lined up against Russia, France, and Britain. And as loyal members of the empire, Newfoundlanders enlisted to fight.
How long did people think this war would actually exist?
On the British side, they figured they were done by Christmas.
By
the Germans
Christmas.
wouldn't be able to withstand the might of the British Empire.
How difficult was it to get people to enlist?
In the early days, not at all.
What was the
very
pitch?
easy. Yeah, the pitch was, let's go over and fight for king and country.
And were the parents of these soldiers feeling the same, or were they anxious about the fate of their sons?
I think in the beginning, it wasn't taken seriously, that this would end up becoming a war of attrition.
And no one knew how bad it was going to get?
No, not in that first year.
Newfoundland had no army back then, but within days, nearly 1,000 men had volunteered. 500 passed muster and joined the Blue Puttees, named due to the color of their leggings. Rare film footage shows their training at Pleasantville, with hardly enough uniforms or weapons to go around. Then they boarded the Florizel, getting their last glimpses of home, sailing past the battery and out across the Atlantic. Training in Scotland and England, the Newfoundland Regiment was fiercely proud.
When they first arrived, when they tried to place them with a Canadian regiment, and Newfoundland came back and said, yeah, no, we're going to pay their salaries, we're going to pension them off, we're going to pay for the ammunition, the guns, their hospital stay, and we're going to pay them at the same rate as the Canadians, which was more than the British, which made the British soldiers mad to be having to fight with the Newfoundlanders who were getting paid double. They called them the 5 bob. That's what the Brits called the Newfoundlanders, because they got paid so much.
So what does that tell you? I mean, the Newfoundlanders had a tremendous sense of pride, and they knew they belonged there.
Yes, very much so. So at first, you know, you don't have a great military tradition amongst those who first joined, but they quickly evolved into an elite fighting force, actually, as the war went on.
First deployed to Gallipoli to fight Germany's ally, Turkey, and then deployed to France and the Western Front at a little village called Beaumont-Hamel. Today, it's a quaint farming community. A few hundred people at the bottom of softly sloping fields. But this is what it looked like in 1916. German soldiers hidden in deep trenches and underground bunkers, the Germans openly photographed in the village. And across a vast no man's land, the British and the Newfoundland Regiment.
They arrived in Beaumont-Hamel in April, and it's the first time that they see the trenches that would forever be etched in the psyche of many Newfoundlanders over the years.
The front lines had been static for months, stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border. But now the British generals decided it was time to dislodge the Germans in what would become known as the Battle of the Somme. And a tip of that spear was at Beaumont-Hamel and the Newfoundland Regiment. Trenches were supposed to offer a level of protection, but even here, where soldiers fought close together in unsanitary conditions, there were dangers. Typhoid, dysentery, cholera, all spread extremely rapidly, and once over the top on higher ground, exposure to a hellish barrage of incoming gunfire. Behind the lines, both sides were getting ready for a massive battle. This rare and historic footage shows supplies, bombs, huge shells delivered to the front. And the constant bombardment of the Germans by British artillery. The generals were convinced they were no longer a threat. But the Germans remained hidden deep in the Y ravine and in bunkers along the front.
2 days before the battle on July 1st, 50-odd men from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment were sent down here and into the German trenches to do some intelligence, grab a German if they could, see what the numbers were like in the Y ravine. And what they found was that they were fully engaged. There was hundreds of Germans in there, and they came back out of the line, and they tried to get that message up through the top brass to say, hey, you need to rethink about this. But nobody wanted to listen.
So the Newfoundlanders had lost even before they had started.
Well, they knew what they were facing. They knew that the bombardment wasn't working. The barbed wire was largely intact, even though they were told it was supposed to have been destroyed by the bombardments. And that bombardment was supposed to have taken a heavy toll on the defenses in that area. It had no effect on them. Matter of fact, the Germans were training between, if the lull came into the bombardment, they would train their machine gun crews to assemble their machine guns, get it ready, fire it, dismantle it, take it down again. So they were constantly training in that week to prepare for the attack.
More than a century has passed, but these green fields at Beaumont-Hamel still mark the place where Newfoundland soldiers and German soldiers faced each other in this vast landscape. From above, you can see the outlines of the trenches, frozen in time, after the last combatants were buried or left the battlefield. Many still lie beneath the soil where they fought and died. Where the Dominion of Newfoundland, the little country of Newfoundland, gave up its blood for king and country. Dawn, July 1st, 1916. This rare footage captures the British barrage of the German front lines near Beaumont-Hamel. These British soldiers nervously await orders to advance. 7:20 a.m. A massive explosion rocks the Hawthorne Ridge, barely a kilometer from the Newfoundlanders. British engineers had buried tons of explosives, hoping to distract the Germans, but it actually tipped them off. The Germans have already climbed out of their bunkers and set up their machine guns with deadly aim. The advancing British regiments were decimated. And then, at 9:15 a.m., 800 Newfoundlanders were ordered forward by their British officers.
Take me into the mind of a soldier in the Newfoundland Regiment, July 1st, 1916. Here they are. They've received the order to push forward, but they know they're walking in to their deaths.
I think you just summed it up. I don't think there was any other thought but the fact that many of them knew they were going to die that day, because they knew they were there. They saw what happened to the battalions that advanced before them. They saw the blood and the dead and the dying in the communication trenches and the frontline trenches. And then their CO comes along, their commanding officer comes along and says, yeah, we're going to attack, but you're going to do it from the reserve trenches. You're not even going to start from the front line. I don't think it's an exaggeration to think that not one man who got up that day didn't think they were going to be dead by the end of it.
And the fact they still pushed forward. I mean, it was an order.
Forward.
They had to push forward.
It was an order. They had to do it, but there was also a sense of pride that you were not going to let your buddies down. And they went. And they didn't charge. They walked. And they were told not to run. And one of the officers who was there that day, later tells the story. It was like they were walking into a blizzard, because Newfoundlanders instinctively dropped their chin down and walked forward. And this is kind of what the soldiers were doing to protect themselves.
They're tucking in their chins.
Yeah.
To protect
as if
themselves.
they're going into a snowstorm, but instead of hail and snow, it's bullets.
That morning, an entire generation of Newfoundland men walked to their deaths. The bodies piled up at choke points, gaps in the barbed wire, like here at the Danger Tree.
There was no battle. It was just a massacre. 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Very few got past Danger Tree, because that's where one of the 15-meter gaps was found during the trench raid. Some were 80 or 90 bodies. There were literally soldiers who crawled over those bodies to continue. And some of them would have been their brothers or their best buds or people from their community, and the few that got farther than that, well, most of them didn't survive.
How heartbreaking that must have been to walk over the bodies of your fellow soldiers.
I can't explain it. I have never experienced it, so, that's all I can tell you is that one fellow who was there that day said you could smell the blood, and he couldn't get clear of the smell. He still, in his nightmares 50 years later, would still smell it.
Back home in Newfoundland, July 1st came and went. But for fathers and mothers and families, there was no news of the tragedy. Headlines trumpeted the Allies' non-existent advances, praised the Newfoundland Regiment, now a ghost army reduced to a handful of soldiers. It took days for the news of the first casualties to be reported, and nearly a month for the full extent of the horror to be revealed.
Why do you think those headlines of the disaster, the story of the disaster, took so long to get published?
They were very much afraid the calamity that would happen if they had announced all these soldiers were killed and wounded at one time to the families back here, and they were really afraid what might have happened. So they slow-rolled the casualties. But in terms of the announcements, even Britain didn't want to have the whole event published in such a way that they were the big losers.
710 casualties that day.
That's out of approximately 800 that fought in that battle.
Almost all.
Almost all.
A sacrifice the French, whose country the Newfoundlanders were defending, still remember to this day. Agnès Brier-Lavaquerie is the mayor of Beaumont-Hamel.
C'était un sacrifice énorme.
C'était un sacrifice énorme.
Et alors pour les Français, surtout pour ceux et celles qui habitent à Beaumont-Hamel,
Oui.
comment est-ce qu'on se souvient du sacrifice des Ternuviens ici?
pour moi, Beaumont-Hamel avec les Terre-Neuviens continueront à perpétuité. Et je m'engage, là, en tant que maire maintenant, à maintenir ces liens au plus profond de moi, au plus profond. Parce que j'ai une reconnaissance, et les gens aussi de Beaumont-Hamel ont une reconnaissance exemplaire devant ces gens qui se sont donnés si jeunes, qui ont laissé leur famille, qui ont laissé leurs amis, qui ont tout laissé, qui ont donné leur vie. Et je suis d'une reconnaissance infinie. Infinie. Et ce que je veux, c'est que cette reconnaissance perdure. Mon souhait, c'est de transmettre.
Pour toujours.
Pour toujours.
Beaumont-Hamel was a tragedy, a defining moment, but a beginning, not an end. The Newfoundland Regiment rebuilt, returned to the fight at places like Monchy-le-Preux, Masnières, Ancre.
When they went to Goudecourt in October of 1916, which is still the Battle of Somme, this is the first time that they've had success on the battlefield as a full unit. But they still took heavy casualties. And, you know, throughout the war, this would continue on. There's Monchy-le-Preux, you know, a small band prevented the Germans from retaking the village.
10 men.
10 men. It was able to prevent the village from falling, which is a huge Hollywood moment, you know, in terms of Newfoundland Regiment's story. But it was a battle later in 17 at the Battle of Cambrai where it would be the defining moment of the regiment's ability to carry the day. But most Newfoundlanders don't know about it. They've never heard about it. Without what they did there, the entire 29th Division would have collapsed. And when the Newfoundlanders, who were the last to come out of Marcoing, saw them coming, instead of going to ground, you know, they lowered their bayonets and they charged.
By the time the war ended in 1918, the Newfoundland Regiment had been honored by the King, allowed to call itself the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. But at a massive cost, 6,000 served in the regiment. 1 in 5 was killed. 600 are missing to this day, their names commemorated at this memorial at Beaumont-Hamel. A generation of Newfoundland men lost to war. The most sacred resting places and battlegrounds watched over by the regiment's symbol, the caribou. In Newfoundland and Labrador, history is remembered in lore and song, and the preeminent troubadour is Alan Doyle.
Well, this is just a meadow, like so many that you know, where boys and girls played soldier in the sunny long ago. Oh no, I'm not a hero, no more or less than you. Well, I'm just like all the others who did what we had to do. So sing me a song when the fields are in flower, and I'll never lie here alone. Love will bring me across the water and into the arms of home. Into the arms of home.
I think I was expecting there to be a castle or a palace or some huge thing that everyone died for. And I got there, and the first thing I noticed was like, this is just a meadow. And that's sort of the origin of the lyric of that first verse of the song. It's like, this is just a meadow. We fought like and died for this. Like there's dozens of them around, and there's dozens of them home. And it just, the weight, the human cost of it struck me, like in a way that the sort of romance of it disappeared.
Weep not for me in summer, nor the winter, spring, or fall. For I've seen my share of sorrow when I was standing tall.
You've long considered yourself a student of Newfoundland history, but it was in that moment where you understood what? You understood the power of
I just
of the
understood,
moment?
I think I understood the humanity of it more. But until I got there and saw all those names, I don't think it ever struck me that these were people. Like these were real dudes, young men with names like mine and names like my neighbors, and it just the human cost of it just really struck home. And your tears will get me nowhere that I've not already known, but a melody can move me ever closer on to home.
And now, an unknown soldier's lament in song will become a reality. At the end of May, a delegation of Newfoundland and Canadian dignitaries gather in France to bring one unknown soldier into the arms of home. But first, they pay homage to the Newfoundlanders who fought and died in decisive battles, like here at Goudecourt, where 120 died.
It has been said that at Beaumont-Hamel, the Newfoundlanders learned how to die. But it was here they learned how to fight. Goudecourt marks the beginning of the regiment's reputation as an elite unit.
And remembered on this day in their own words.
We love thee, we love thee, we love thee, smiling land.
Newfoundland Premier Andrew Furey's son, Mark, reading a letter home from a soldier who would have been only a few years older than he is now.
I'm writing this now in a place that the British were a few weeks ago, and where we are still advancing. We will be in the thick of it very soon, and we expect to do well. Kind regards to all relatives and friends. Love to myself and kids. From Steve.
Days after Lieutenant Steve Norris penned those words, he died in the thick of it, here. And without him, the family business back in Newfoundland did not survive.
What do you want kids your age to know about war?
Not a lot of the soldiers were only a couple of years older than me, and that most or a lot of them didn't come home.
When you've been walking through the cemeteries with your mom and dad, do you feel how powerful and how solemn it is?
Yeah, I do.
What's been the most striking thing for you?
That some of them, well, the youngest I've seen was 18, but they might have lied about their age to go to the war.
You're 13. This is a war that happened more than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
You're 13 years old. You're keeping the story alive.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's so important to remember?
So it doesn't happen again. And because it was a really crazy and terrible thing that happened.
Premier Andrew Furey.
Canadians often forget Newfoundland was its own country. A proud, strong country, part of the Commonwealth. And we decided to step up and contribute. Even though we were small, we wanted to contribute to the King's effort in World War I. And that came with incredible consequences, incredible sacrifice, and incredible impacts to families, communities, and the economy in the province and the country at the time overall, leading to a lost generation of young men, future leaders, future businessmen, future entrepreneurs, future community leaders, future religious leaders, gone in a small country combined with the economic weight and the fiscal weight of a war debt, ultimately led to us giving up our independence and ultimately joining Canada.
What goes through your mind as you look at these headstones?
Well, you can't help but be struck by the ages. And for me, being Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, to see common names that we all recognize as being part of Newfoundland and Labrador, because every community almost contributed some young man to the First World War effort. And then, of course, very struck by the age. I'm here with my son, who's 13, and there are many teenagers amongst us here in this very cemetery, and that is overwhelming.
Like many Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, Federal Cabinet Minister Seamus O'Regan has a personal connection. His great-great-uncle is buried at Beaumont-Hamel.
These are names that represent lost dreams and lost futures and an entire generation, right? That was just wiped out so quickly.
Each of them were the best and the brightest of each of their little communities. So it wasn't just the sheer quantity that we lost. It was their quality. They were leaders, you know? They were bright sparks that took the call for king and country and went, yeah, okay, me too, let's do our bit. And they knew what they were getting into. If you read the letters that they wrote, they knew what they were getting into. And they knew even on that day what they were getting into. But this was their duty, this was their responsibility.
On July 1st, there will be an unknown soldier who will be returning home.
Yeah. Myself and my really good friend Corey Tetford wrote that song about this very scenario, except about bringing someone home. Of course, we meant it metaphorically. You know, it's like, just go home and sing songs for me and I'll be there, you know? And I'll live in your melody and in your words. And I don't think either of us thought that we'd actually get a chance to have this song associated with actually bringing someone home.
So sing me a song when the fields are in flower, and I'll never lie here alone. And love will bring me across the water and into the arms of home. Into the arms of home.
At Beaumont-Hamel today, the symbol of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, the caribou, watches over the fields where so many died. With nearly 600 still missing, their names are commemorated here. Tourists walk the battlefields and cemeteries, struck by the story of sacrifice, told by Canadians like Jeremy Fauconnier, no older than those who lost their lives here.
The trenches have barely been touched in over 100 years. There's still shrapnel and we still find explosives in the ground today. There's still an active red zone.
But for some, this is more than just a historic site. Beaumont-Hamel is sacred ground.
We often get Newfoundlanders that have ties to the monuments. A large percentage of them served, and unfortunately a large percentage of those who served died or were casualties. So here we have the story of the Eyre brothers and cousins. They were all heirs to a large company in Newfoundland. They all died on the opening battle of the Somme.
For Newfoundlanders like David Emberley, coming here is a pilgrimage. A year ago, he came with his sons to remember a great-great-uncle.
It was the evening time, the park was closed, so it was just myself and my two sons, and that was it, and a sky full of stars. So it made it extra special, and we walked down to a place called the Danger Tree, where many of the Newfoundlanders were killed, and we sat down there. It was one of the best, most special moments in my life, and it's a very special place because of the loss of so many people. So.
You're getting quite choked up now.
Yeah.
I mean, for a father to experience that with his sons, it's something that you'll never forget.
No, it was a special moment, and You know, when we were leaving, I said to my boys, I said, do you think you'll ever come back? And their response was, when we have kids, we'll bring our kids back.
My grandfather's story starts right here. This is his first major engagement.
For Frank Gogos, his family's story is not at Beaumont-Hamel, but written at battles like Goudecourt and Cambrai.
This is your life's work, right? I mean, to be able to keep this history alive, what sort of a personal toll has it taken?
You want the hard truth? My family. Well, you know, I got so caught up in all this. I kind of put my family to one side.
But it also speaks to your passion to keep these stories alive. Yeah. Why is it so important to you?
It's my family is what actually starts this for me. And like so many Newfoundlanders, I believed Newfoundland's story was Beaumont-Hamel and only Beaumont-Hamel. And, you know, when I started researching my grandfather's story, that's when I started to realize. Because he had a Bible, and in the back of the Bible, he said, if this is found on the battlefields, you know, I have been through 6 battles, you know, and if this Bible is found on the battlefield, please return it to my father. And I'm looking at 6 battles. And then I started to realize in my own mind how many Newfoundland stories were not covered because they weren't at Beaumont-Hamel.
The Trail of the Caribou stretches across northern France, and to this day, remains of the fallen may be found in the meadows and farm fields. And when they are discovered, every attempt is made to identify them. But now, the sacrifices of all Newfoundlanders who fought and who died in World War I are being honored with the repatriation of an unknown soldier, taken from his grave in France to be entombed at the National War Memorial in St. John's. Sarah Lockyer is a forensic anthropologist with the Canadian Forces.
How much meaning does this work bring to you personally?
Personally, it's the whole point as a forensic anthropologist to return a name, a face, an identity to an individual who's been unknown or missing for more than 100 years. And recognizing that this work changes history. It changes Canada's history because that individual is no longer missing. We know who he is, he gets talked about, he gets his time in the limelight, and it's quite the privilege to be able to be a part of that.
It's painstaking work. Stéphane Nagy heads the recovery unit.
The investigation for the identification of the soldier always starts with the associated artifacts. So the types of weapon, so you have a Commonwealth type bayonet, a German one, the ammunition associated, the type of silverware. These items will give us a generic sense of which nation did the soldier come from. The next step then is going down the steps from nation to regiment. If we're lucky, we'll have regimental buttons, sometimes specific ones that are from a specific regiment. We would have, if we're lucky, shoulder title, cap badges. All of this narrows down the list of potential victim to a specific unit, to a specific officer, depending on the types of item we find.
But the unknown soldier is special. He represents all Newfoundlanders who died in combat and who are missing. In this case, the most detailed investigation was purposely not carried out.
That means analyzing human remains, analyzing the archaeological data, doing DNA testing to try to find this individual's identity, doing genealogy research to find family members. And in this particular case, for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, I had to do the exact opposite of my job. So it's been a little conflicting emotions of I cannot identify this person, and that's the whole purpose of the field of forensic anthropology, is to return an identity and a face to an individual. And the only way we could achieve this result of having a Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in St. John's is by doing none of that.
Is that frustrating for you?
A little bit, yes. but it is what it is, and it's what the nation and the government of Newfoundland agreed to, and Commonwealth War Graves agreed to.
In this case of the unknown soldier, how much of him was discovered?
I can't really tell you that. What we did recover with the remains, we found a Newfoundland shoulder title with the remains. So it was kind of just a bit of a sigh of relief of, okay, everything went smoothly, confirmation
Is
that
that
this,
a badge on a
yes,
uniform? Okay.
badge on the shoulder, which I then put in the casket with the remains, sort of at the shoulder area.
So you found that with the remains?
We found that with the remains. We found his boots as well. So I put the boots at the foot of the casket when I put the remains in the casket. So there were a couple pieces of artifacts. There was a bit of textile, likely a uniform, but pieces about this big. The boots and the shoulder title.
In this time when we have, DNA technology available, we have all the science available to us in the world. Some people might be asking the question, why does this soldier still have to be unknown?
Why does it have to be unknown? I mean, the basic answer is because it is the unknown warrior, so it needs to represent all the others. For the unknown warrior, we want the warrior to remain unknown, because otherwise it defeats the purpose of symbolizing all the fallen.
At an airfield in Lille in northern France, a sacred ceremony marks the departure from Europe of an unknown Newfoundland soldier. 110 years after the start of World War I, more than a century after he fell in one of the battlegrounds, a sacrifice for his homeland, and in defense of a nation that was not his own, France, but for which he was prepared to give his life.
July 1st for the rest of the country is about fireworks, it's about picnics, it's about celebrations. For Newfoundlanders, until noon,
yeah, that's right.
It represents a day that is solemn.
It's one of the great myths and lores and legends of Newfoundland and Canada's, marriage. Like it basically happened on April Fool's Day, for example. The whole Confederation thing, they rushed it the night before. And then the big national day of celebration for Canada is Newfoundland's National Day of Mourning. And it's just like, there's so many ironies in it all that's, it's kind of bizarre.
It's almost like emotional whiplash.
It is. And it's like, July 1st is definitely a schizophrenic day for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, because it's an odd time when we're both celebrating and mourning on the same 12-hour schedule.
What is the lesson here?
There's a couple of lessons, in a way, is that our involvement in the war was a national involvement. When you look overseas and you see 5 giant caribous representing out there in the battlefields, and it's for one regiment, one battalion, it doesn't make any sense. But Newfoundland's national identity is what that caribou actually represents. And the pride as Newfoundlanders that we've had over the years, and I should include Labradorians as well. And so when we take, say, July 1, we're paying homage to our forefathers who fought and died and suffered, and then we switch gears. And like you said, we'll go out and then we'll have our barbecues afterwards.
5 hours later, a fighter escort.
We are here to stand guard, escorting the remains of a true Canadian hero.
As the unknown soldier arrives in Newfoundland and Labrador, home. On his way to a final resting place, the National War Memorial in St. John's.
It's really important for many Newfoundlanders that this took place.
It's a validation of the sacrifice.
I don't think there's any validation to any sacrifice in any war. I'm not one of those. I think it's a tragedy. Pure and simple, war is nothing but a tragedy. Failure of diplomacy. And people have to fight it. And those who fight it are our sons and our daughters. And, if we don't learn from it, we're going to send them out again, and it's going to happen all over again.
So sing me a song when the fields are in flower, and I'll never lie here alone. And love will bring me across the water and into the arms of home. the arms of home. Oh, sing me a song when the fields are in flower, and I'll never lie here alone. And love will bring me across the water and into the arms of a home, into the arms of a home, home, into the arms of home, into the arms of home.